There is an old saying that goes, "The fish is caught because it opens its mouth." Think about that for a moment. Not because it was weak, not because it wasn't intelligent, not because it couldn't swim. It was caught because it couldn't keep its mouth shut. Most people never realize that the greatest battles of life are not lost through a lack of strength, they are lost through unnecessary words. A careless sentence can destroy a friendship that took years to build. One emotional outburst can ruin a career. One secret shared with the wrong person can become the weapon that is eventually used against you. Yet, every single day, millions of people continue to talk far more than they should. They explain themselves when no explanation is needed. They reveal their dreams before those dreams have taken shape. They argue with people who have already decided not to understand them. They try to convince strangers. They defend themselves against every accusation. They respond to every insult. And then they wonder why life feels so exhausting. The Stoics understood something that modern society has forgotten. Not every thought deserves to become words. Not every opinion deserves to be spoken. Not every battle deserves your voice. Sometimes the strongest thing you can say is absolutely nothing. We live in a world that mistakes noise for confidence. The moment we wake up, we reach for our phones. We reply to messages, comment on posts, argue with strangers, and feel pressured to always have an opinion about everything. Silence has become uncomfortable. If we're quiet for too long, people assume something is wrong. If we don't respond immediately, we're considered distant. If we don't defend ourselves, we're accused of being weak. But what if the opposite is true? What if silence isn't weakness at all? What if silence is one of the greatest forms of strength a person can possess? The loudest people in the room are rarely the most respected. The person who constantly interrupts conversations seldom appears wise. The one who always needs to prove they're right often reveals their deepest insecurity. Real confidence doesn't scream, it whispers. Real wisdom doesn't compete for attention, it waits. The Stoic philosophers understood this long before the modern world became obsessed with being seen and heard. Marcus Aurelius, one of history's greatest Stoic emperors, reminded himself to speak only when necessary and to make sure that whatever he said improved upon silence. Think about that. A man who ruled an empire, a man whose words could start wars or establish peace, still believed that many words were unnecessary. Today, many people possess almost no power, yet they speak as though every thought deserves an audience. The irony is impossible to ignore. The more insecure someone becomes, the more they often feel compelled to talk. They exaggerate their achievements. They announce every plan before taking the first step. They seek constant validation. They explain every decision. Why? Because deep inside, they hope that if enough people approve of them, they'll finally approve of themselves. But external approval is a hunger that can never truly be satisfied. Every compliment creates the need for another. Every round of applause eventually fades. Every audience eventually leaves. The Stoics sought something far more valuable, inner approval, and inner approval requires very little talking. Have you ever noticed how the most dangerous person in a negotiation is often the quiet one? While everyone else rushes to fill the silence, they simply observe. They notice nervous habits. They detect hidden motives. They hear what others accidentally reveal. Because silence doesn't only hide your thoughts, it exposes everyone else's. Most people cannot tolerate silence. After just a few seconds, they feel an irresistible urge to speak, to joke, to explain, or even to confess things that were never asked of them. But silence is not empty. Silence is information. It reveals impatience. It reveals confidence. It reveals self-control. Whoever controls silence often controls the conversation. Think about the greatest poker players in the world. They rarely reveal what they're thinking. Their faces remain calm. Their emotions remain hidden. Their words are few, not because they have nothing to say, but because information is power. Life works the same way. When people know exactly what you're planning, they know how to stop you. When they know your weaknesses, they know where to attack. When they know your fears, they know how to manipulate you. Not everyone who asks questions wants to help you. Some people are simply collecting ammunition. That doesn't mean you should become paranoid. It means you should become discerning. There is a profound difference. The Stoics were never antisocial. They weren't cold. They weren't detached from humanity. They simply understood that wisdom begins with self-control, and self-control begins with the tongue. One of the greatest misconceptions about silence is that it makes you weak. In reality, silence is one of the hardest disciplines a human being can practice. Anyone can react, anyone can argue, anyone can shout, anyone can insult someone who insulted them, but very few people can remain calm when their emotions are demanding a response. That is strength. Imagine someone insults you publicly. Your heart begins to race, your pride demands revenge, your mind instantly creates the perfect comeback. Most people speak, the Stoic pauses. That pause changes everything, because between emotion and action lies freedom, and the person who masters that small space masters themselves. Epictetus once reminded his students that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. Simple, yet revolutionary. Imagine how different your life would become if you truly lived by that principle. You would make fewer enemies. You would avoid unnecessary conflict. You would understand people more deeply. You would become harder to manipulate. You would earn respect without demanding it, because people trust those who don't constantly feel the need to speak. Silence has another extraordinary quality. It forces people to reveal themselves. When you stop interrupting, people tell you who they really are. When you stop trying to impress, people show you what truly matters to them. When you stop talking, you begin seeing, and what you see may change your life forever. Most people spend years trying to become more persuasive. The Stoics first learned how to become better observers. Observation always comes before wisdom. Words often get in the way of observation. So, ask yourself this question. How many problems in your life were caused by saying too little? And how many were caused by saying too much? That answer alone may reveal why silence has been praised by philosophers, warriors, kings, and sages for thousands of years. Because silence is not the absence of power. Silence is power under control, and the person who learns to control their words eventually learns to control their life. There is an old saying that goes, "The fish is caught because it opens its mouth." Think about that for a moment. Not because it was weak, not because it wasn't intelligent, not because it couldn't swim. It was caught because it couldn't keep its mouth shut. Most people never realize that the greatest battles of life are not lost through a lack of strength. They are lost through unnecessary words. A careless sentence can destroy a friendship that took years to build. One emotional outburst can ruin a career. One secret shared with the wrong person can become the weapon that is eventually used against you. Yet, every single day, millions of people continue to talk far more than they should. They explain themselves when no explanation is needed. They reveal their dreams before those dreams have taken shape. They argue with people who have already decided not to understand them. They try to convince strangers. They defend themselves against every accusation. They respond to every insult. And then they wonder why life feels so exhausting. The Stoics understood something that modern society has forgotten. Not every thought deserves to become words. Not every opinion deserves to be spoken. Not every battle deserves your voice. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can say is absolutely nothing. We live in a world that mistakes noise for confidence. The moment we wake up, we reach for our phones. We reply to messages, comment on posts, argue with strangers, and feel pressured to always have an opinion about everything. Silence has become uncomfortable. If we're quiet for too long, people assume something is wrong. If we don't respond immediately, we're considered distant. If we don't defend ourselves, we're accused of being weak. But what if the opposite is true? What if silence isn't weakness at all? What if silence is one of the greatest forms of strength a person can possess? The loudest people in the room are rarely the most respected. The person who constantly interrupts conversations seldom appears wise. The one who always needs to prove they're right often reveals their deepest insecurity. Real confidence doesn't scream, it whispers. Real wisdom doesn't compete for attention, it waits. The Stoic philosophers understood this long before the modern world became obsessed with being seen and heard. Marcus Aurelius, one of history's greatest Stoic emperors, reminded himself to speak only when necessary and to make sure that whatever he said improved upon silence. Think about that. A man who ruled an empire, a man whose words could start wars or establish peace, still believed that many words were unnecessary. Today, many people possess almost no power, yet they speak as though every thought deserves an audience. The irony is impossible to ignore. The more insecure someone becomes, the more they often feel compelled to talk. They exaggerate their achievements. They announce every plan before taking the first step. They seek constant validation. They explain every decision why. Because deep inside they hope that, if enough people approve of them, they'll finally approve of themselves. But external approval is a hunger that can never truly be satisfied. Every compliment creates the need for another. Every round of applause eventually fades. Every audience eventually leaves. The Stoics sought something far more valuable, inner approval, and inner approval requires very little talking. Have you ever noticed how the most dangerous person in a negotiation is often the quiet one? While everyone else rushes to fill the silence, they simply observe. They notice nervous habits. They detect hidden motives. They hear what others accidentally reveal. Because silence doesn't only hide your thoughts, it exposes everyone else's. Most people cannot tolerate silence. After just a few seconds, they feel an irresistible urge to speak, to joke, to explain, or even to confess things that were never asked of them. But silence is not empty. Silence is information. It reveals impatience. It reveals confidence. It reveals self-control. Whoever controls silence often controls the conversation. Think about the greatest poker players in the world. They rarely reveal what they're thinking. Their faces remain calm. Their emotions remain hidden. Their words are few. Not because they have nothing to say, but because information is power. Life works the same way. When people know exactly what you're planning, they know how to stop you. When they know your weaknesses, they know where to attack. When they know your fears, they know how to manipulate you. Not everyone who asks questions wants to help you. Some people are simply collecting ammunition. That doesn't mean you should become paranoid. It means you should become discerning. There is a profound difference. The Stoics were never antisocial. They weren't cold. They weren't detached from humanity. They simply understood that wisdom begins with self-control, and self-control begins with the tongue. One of the greatest misconceptions about silence is that it makes you weak. In reality, silence is one of the hardest disciplines a human being can practice. Anyone can react. Anyone can argue. Anyone can shout. Anyone can insult someone who insulted them. But very few people can remain calm when their emotions are demanding a response. That is strength. Imagine someone insults you publicly. Your heart begins to race. Your pride demands revenge. Your mind instantly creates the perfect comeback. Most people speak. The Stoic pauses. That pause changes everything. Because between emotion and action lies freedom, and the person who masters that small space masters themselves. Epictetus once reminded his students that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. Simple, yet revolutionary. Imagine how different your life would become if you truly lived by that principle. You would make fewer enemies. You would avoid unnecessary conflict. You would understand people more deeply. You would become harder to manipulate. You would earn respect without demanding it, because people trust those who don't constantly feel the need to speak. Silence has another extraordinary quality. It forces people to reveal themselves. When you stop interrupting, people tell you who they really are. When you stop trying to impress, people show you what truly matters to them. When you stop talking, you begin seeing. And what you see may change your life forever. Most people spend years trying to become more persuasive. The Stoics first learned how to become better observers. Observation always comes before wisdom. Words often get in the way of observation. So, ask yourself this question. How many problems in your life were caused by saying too little? And how many were caused by saying too much? That answer alone may reveal why silence has been praised by philosophers, warriors, kings, and sages for thousands of years. Because silence is not the absence of power. Silence is power under control. And the person who learns to control their words eventually learns to control their life. One of the greatest mistakes people make is believing that the more they reveal about themselves, the more people will respect them. In reality, the opposite is often true. The more you speak, the more opportunities you create to be misunderstood. The more you explain, the more pieces of yourself you place into the hands of others. And not everyone who listens is listening with good intentions. Some people listen to understand, others listen to judge, Some listen to learn, others listen only to find your weaknesses. This is why the Stoics practiced restraint, not because they were secretive, but because they understood the value of discretion. Every word has a cost. Before you speak, ask yourself a simple question. Is what I'm about to say necessary? If the answer is no, perhaps silence is the wiser choice. Most people feel an irresistible urge to fill every quiet moment with conversation. A brief silence in a meeting becomes uncomfortable. A pause during dinner feels awkward. An unanswered question creates anxiety. So, they begin talking. They speak simply to escape the discomfort of silence. But those who have mastered themselves understand something different. Silence is not awkward. It is only awkward to those who are uncomfortable with themselves. A person who is at peace within doesn't fear quiet moments. They don't feel pressured to entertain everyone. They don't chase attention. They don't believe every silence must be filled. Instead, they allow silence to work in their favor. There is something fascinating about human nature. The less people know about you, the more carefully they observe you. Mystery commands attention. Constant explanation destroys it. Have you ever noticed that the people who constantly post every detail of their lives often struggle to maintain anyone's interest? Every achievement is announced. Every plan is shared. Every disappointment becomes public. Every opinion is broadcast. Eventually, there is nothing left to discover, nothing left to wonder about, nothing left to respect. Contrast that with someone who quietly goes about their work. They don't announce every goal. They don't seek applause before they've accomplished anything. They simply work. Then, one day, the results speak louder than words ever could. The Stoics admired this way of living. They believed that character should announce itself through actions, not speeches. Anyone can claim to be disciplined. Anyone can say they're honest. Anyone can declare themselves wise. But words are cheap. Actions require sacrifice. The tree never announces that it's growing. It simply grows. Season after season, year after year, it sinks its roots deeper into the earth. Only later does everyone notice its strength. Your life should resemble that tree. Grow quietly. Improve privately. Let your progress surprise people. Not because you're trying to impress them, but because real growth rarely needs an audience. One of the greatest dangers of talking too much is that it creates an illusion of accomplishment. Psychologists have observed something interesting. When people repeatedly tell others about their goals, they often experience a temporary feeling of satisfaction, as though they've already achieved something. The praise comes early. The motivation fades. The work remains unfinished. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology gave it a name. Speak less about your intentions. Work more on your actions. Let discipline become your announcement. There is another reason wise people guard their words. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. That may sound harsh, but it is true. Some people celebrate your victories. Others secretly resent them. Some encourage your dreams. Others quietly hope you fail. This is why discernment is so important. You don't have to share every ambition with every acquaintance. You don't have to explain every decision to people who were never part of the journey. You don't need permission to pursue the life you want. Many people destroy their confidence by exposing their dreams too early. They share an idea. Someone laughs. Someone doubts them. Someone says, that will never work. And suddenly, a dream that once felt possible begins to feel impossible. Not because reality changed, but because they allowed someone else's opinion to become louder than their own conviction. Protect your vision. Not everyone needs to understand it. Not everyone needs to approve of it. The seed grows underground long before anyone sees the tree. If you dig it up every day to show people your progress, you'll prevent it from growing. Your dreams deserve the same patience. Keep watering them in silence. Let your success introduce itself. There is immense power in becoming difficult to read. This doesn't mean becoming cold or dishonest. It means becoming emotionally disciplined. When someone insults you, they expect a reaction. When someone provokes you, they expect anger. When someone criticizes you, they expect you to defend yourself. Imagine their surprise when they receive none of those things. Calmness unsettles those who feed on chaos. Silence frustrates those who crave your reaction. Composure confuses those who expected your collapse. Your greatest strength is not always found in what you say. Often it is found in what you refuse to say. Seneca once reminded his students that the wise person speaks because they have something to say, while the fool speaks because they have to say something. That distinction changes everything. Many conversations add nothing to your life. Many arguments solve nothing. Many explanations convince no one. So why participate? Every unnecessary conversation consumes something valuable. Your time, your focus, your emotional energy. These are resources you can never recover. Spend them wisely. There is a reason diamonds are valuable. They are rare. If diamonds were scattered across every sidewalk, they would lose their worth. Words are no different. The more carelessly you use them, the less value they carry. But when you speak thoughtfully, when your words are measured, when your voice is calm, people begin to listen more carefully, because they know that when you speak, it matters. That is true influence. Not talking more, talking with purpose. The Stoics never encouraged silence for the sake of appearing mysterious. They encouraged silence because it created space for wisdom. You cannot truly listen while you're speaking. You cannot truly observe while you're trying to impress. You cannot truly learn while you're busy proving how much you already know. The quiet mind notices what the noisy mind misses. It sees opportunities. It recognizes deception. It detects sincerity. It understands people more deeply because it spends more time observing than performing. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Your mouth can only reveal what you already know, but your ears can teach you something entirely new. So, the next time you feel the urge to interrupt, explain, to defend, or to prove yourself, pause. Ask yourself one simple question. Will these words improve the silence? If they won't, then let the silence remain. Because silence, when chosen with wisdom, is never empty. It is filled with strength, discipline, and quiet confidence. And in a world where everyone is desperate to be heard, the person who has mastered the art of saying less often becomes the one whose words carry the greatest weight. One of the most exhausting habits you can develop is the constant need to explain yourself. You explain why you made a certain decision. You explain why you chose a different path. You explain why you didn't answer a message. You explain your ambitions. You explain your mistakes. You explain your silence. Eventually, your entire life becomes an endless attempt to make other people comfortable with choices that were never theirs to make. But here's a difficult truth. Not everyone deserves an explanation, and not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. The Stoics understood that one of the highest forms of freedom is the freedom to let people think whatever they want. That sounds terrifying, doesn't it? Because most of us have been conditioned to believe that our reputation depends on everyone's opinion. We've been taught that if someone misunderstands us, we must immediately set the record straight. If someone criticizes us, we must defend ourselves. If someone spreads rumors, we must respond. But ask yourself this: has arguing with people ever truly changed the minds of those who were determined to misunderstand you? Most of the time it hasn't. Instead, it drains your energy, it steals your peace, and it traps you in conversations that lead nowhere. There is an old saying, never wrestle with a pig. You both get dirty, and the pig enjoys it. Some people don't seek understanding, they seek conflict. They don't ask questions because they're curious. They ask questions because they're looking for something to attack. The more you explain yourself to such people, the more material you give them. Imagine standing in a courtroom where the judge has already decided you're guilty before the trial even begins. Would presenting more evidence change the outcome? Probably not. Some people operate exactly like that. They've already reached a conclusion about who you are. Every explanation you offer simply becomes another opportunity for them to twist your words. The Stoics refuse to live under the control of other people's opinions. They recognize something that many of us spend years learning. You cannot control what others think of you. You can only control whether their opinions disturb your peace. Marcus Aurelius faced criticism throughout his reign. People questioned his decisions. They doubted his leadership. Some even betrayed him. Yet instead of chasing approval, he returned his attention to the only thing he truly controlled, his own character. He understood that reputation is largely outside your control. Character is not. Think about how much time people waste trying to manage appearances. They carefully craft explanations. They rehearse conversations. They replay arguments in their minds. They worry endlessly about what someone else might be thinking. Meanwhile, life quietly passes them by. The Stoics would ask a simple question: why spend your energy controlling something that has never belonged to you? Other people's thoughts belong to them, not to you. You could speak perfectly and still be misunderstood. You could act with complete integrity and still be criticized. You could dedicate your life to helping others, and someone would still find fault. That is simply human nature. Trying to escape criticism is like trying to stop the wind from blowing. It cannot be done. So why exhaust yourself trying? One of the greatest signs of emotional maturity is becoming comfortable with being misunderstood. Not because you enjoy it, but because you understand that truth doesn't require universal agreement. The sun doesn't stop shining because someone insists it's cloudy. Truth remains truth, regardless of who refuses to see it. Many people explain themselves because they're afraid of rejection. They fear disappointing others. They fear being judged. They fear losing relationships. But relationships that depend on constant explanations are often built on fragile foundations. Healthy relationships are built on trust, not endless justification. There is a remarkable confidence in someone who calmly says, "I made my decision," and then leaves it at that. No long speeches, no defensive tone, no desperate attempt to win approval, just quiet certainty. That kind of confidence cannot be faked. It comes from someone who has stopped seeking permission to live according to their values. Seneca once observed that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. How often have you spent hours preparing an explanation for a conversation that never even happened? How often have you worried about someone's opinion, only to discover they weren't thinking about you at all? The mind creates unnecessary battles. The Stoic learns to recognize them, and then quietly walks away. This doesn't mean you should never explain yourself. There are times when clarity is necessary. There are moments when honest communications strengthens relationships. If you've hurt someone you care about, an explanation can bring healing. If you've made a mistake, taking responsibility is a sign of integrity. Stoicism is not about becoming cold or emotionally distant. It's about knowing the difference between meaningful communication and pointless self-defense. One builds connection, the other feeds insecurity. Learn to recognize that difference. Not every accusation deserves a response. Not every rumor deserves your attention. Not every misunderstanding deserves your correction. Sometimes your silence says more than any explanation ever could. It communicates confidence. It communicates self-respect. It communicates that your peace is too valuable to be traded for an argument. There will always be people who dislike you. There will always be people who question your motives. There will always be people who create stories about your life without knowing the truth. Let them. Their opinions are not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to live with honesty, to act with integrity, to remain faithful to your principles, even when no one understands them. Because, in the end, the people who truly matter won't require endless explanations, and the people who demand them endlessly were never going to be satisfied anyway. So, the next time you feel the urge to defend every decision, to justify every action, or to convince someone who has already made up their mind, pause, take a breath, ask yourself, am I speaking to create understanding, or am I speaking because my ego cannot tolerate being misunderstood? That single question can save you from countless unnecessary conversations. Remember this: the more secure you become, the less you feel the need to explain yourself. Confidence is quiet, wisdom is patient, and peace belongs to the person who no longer feels obligated to answer every opinion, every accusation, or every misunderstanding. Sometimes, protecting your silence is the strongest explanation you can ever give. There is a reason nature gave you 2 ears and only 1 mouth. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus believed this wasn't a coincidence. He reminded his students that we should listen twice as much as we speak. Yet most people do the exact opposite. They enter conversations not to understand, but to be understood. They don't listen. They wait. They wait for the other person to stop talking so they can finally say what they've been thinking all along. They interrupt. They finish other people's sentences. They assume they already know what the other person is about to say. And because of that, they miss the very information that could have changed everything. Listening is becoming a rare skill. In a world where everyone wants a voice, very few people are willing to lend an ear. That is precisely why good listeners stand out. When someone truly listens to you, without interrupting, judging, or trying to prove a point, you remember them. Not because they talk the most, but because they made you feel heard. That is a quiet kind of power. The Stoics understood that wisdom begins with observation. Before you can understand life, you must first learn to observe it. Before you can understand people, you must first learn to listen to them. Observation is impossible when your mouth is always moving. Imagine walking into a room full of strangers. One person immediately begins talking about themselves. They tell everyone where they've been, what they've achieved, what they own, who they know. They dominate every conversation. Another person says very little. They greet people politely. They ask thoughtful questions. Then they simply listen. Hours later, who knows more? The one who talked or the one who listened? The answer is obvious. The listener has gathered information about everyone in the room. The talker has mostly repeated things they already knew. That is one of life's simplest truths. Every time you speak, you repeat what you already know. Every time you listen, you have the opportunity to learn something new. Knowledge grows through listening. Ego grows through talking. This is why emotionally intelligent people rarely rush to speak. They understand that every conversation contains valuable information. People reveal themselves constantly, not only through their words, but through their tone, their facial expressions, their body language, their moments of hesitation, their excitement, their frustration. If you're too busy planning your next sentence, you'll miss all of it. The Stoics believed that human beings often reveal more than they intend. A person's values appear in the stories they choose to tell. Their fears emerge in the things they avoid discussing. Their priorities become visible through the way they spend their attention. You don't discover these things by speaking. You discover them by observing. Have you ever noticed that the wisest person in a meeting is often the one who speaks last? There is a reason for that. While everyone else is busy expressing opinions, they're collecting information, they're noticing patterns, they're identifying contradictions, they're understanding perspectives. By the time they finally speak, they have a clearer picture than everyone else. Their words carry weight because they are informed, not impulsive. Imagine an experienced chess player. Before making a move, they study the board. They consider every possibility. They anticipate their opponent's intentions. Only then do they act. Now imagine a beginner. They move the first piece they see. No strategy, no patience, no foresight. Conversations are remarkably similar. Most people respond like beginners. They react instantly. They interrupt. They argue before fully understanding the issue. The Stoic behaves differently. They observe first, they think second, they speak last. That order changes everything. One of the greatest advantages of listening is that it protects you from unnecessary mistakes. How many arguments begin because someone misunderstood what was actually being said? How many relationships have been damaged because someone reacted before listening completely? How many opportunities have been lost because pride refused to stay silent for just a few more seconds? Patience is not passive. Patience is intelligent. Silence gives understanding room to grow. The ego hates listening. Why? Because listening requires humility. It requires admitting that someone else may know something you don't. It requires accepting that your perspective isn't the only perspective. The ego wants to be the teacher. Wisdom is willing to remain the student. No matter how successful you become, no matter how knowledgeable you become, there will always be something another person can teach you. The moment you believe you've learned everything is the moment you stop growing. Socrates, one of history's greatest philosophers, famously declared, "I know that I know nothing." That wasn't weakness, it was intellectual humility. It was the recognition that true wisdom begins where arrogance ends. The Stoics embraced that same mindset. They approached life with curiosity instead of certainty. They asked questions instead of making assumptions. They listened before reaching conclusions, and because of that, they continued learning long after others believed they already knew enough. There is another remarkable benefit to listening. People trust those who genuinely pay attention. Think about the people you feel most comfortable around. Chances are, they aren't the loudest people you know. They're the ones who make you feel understood. They remember small details. They notice changes in your mood. They ask thoughtful questions. They don't constantly redirect every conversation back to themselves. That is rare, and because it is rare, it is valuable. If you want influence, become someone who listens. If you want wisdom, become someone who observes. If you want stronger relationships, become someone who understands before seeking to be understood. These qualities cannot be developed while you're constantly speaking. Silence creates space for connection. There is an old proverb that says, "A wise man learns more from his enemies than a fool learns from his friends." Why? Because the wise person listens, even when it's uncomfortable. They search for truth, not validation. Even criticism can become a teacher if you're humble enough to hear it. That doesn't mean every critic is correct, far from it. But sometimes, hidden within harsh words, is a lesson worth discovering. Only the person who listens carefully will find it. The Stoics never feared learning. They feared ignorance disguised as certainty. They understood that every conversation is an opportunity to learn, to understand, to grow, to become wiser than you were yesterday. But only if you're willing to remain quiet long enough to receive the lesson. So, the next time you're in a conversation, resist the urge to interrupt. Resist the temptation to prove how much you know. Instead, listen, observe, pay attention. Notice what isn't being said. Sometimes silence reveals more than words ever could. Sometimes a person's pauses speak louder than their sentences. Sometimes the truth is hidden between the lines. The person who learns to hear those silent messages gains an understanding that cannot be found in books alone. Remember this: your words reveal your knowledge, your silence reveals your wisdom, your listening reveals your character. Master all three, and you'll possess a quiet strength that very few people ever develop. Because the greatest communicators are not those who speak the most, they are those who understand the most. And understanding always begins with listening. One of the greatest lessons life will ever teach you is this: not everyone who smiles at you is your friend. Not everyone who asks about your life genuinely cares about your well-being. And not everyone who listens to you is listening with good intentions. Some people are gathering information. Some are satisfying their curiosity. Some are comparing their lives to yours. And some are simply waiting for the right moment to use your own words against you. This isn't a reason to become fearful of people. It's a reason to become wise. The Stoics never encourage suspicion without cause. They encourage discernment. There is a difference. Discernment allows you to recognize that trust should be earned, not freely handed to everyone who crosses your path. Think back to a moment when you shared something deeply personal with someone. Perhaps it was a dream, a fear, a mistake, or a weakness. At the time it felt harmless, maybe even comforting. But months later, during a disagreement, that very same information was brought back and used against you. Suddenly, what once felt like a safe conversation became a painful lesson. Many people experience this. Few learn from it. The truth is, words cannot be taken back. Once they leave your mouth, they no longer belong to you. You lose control over how they're interpreted, repeated, or remembered. A sentence spoken in confidence can become gossip. A private struggle can become public entertainment. A vulnerable confession can become someone else's advantage. The Stoics understood this well. That is why they treated speech with the same care that an archer treats an arrow. Before an arrow is released, it is entirely under your control. The moment it leaves the bow, it belongs to fate. Words work the same way. Before you speak, your words belong to you. After you speak, you belong to your words. That is why wisdom asks you to pause before speaking. Not after. Most people reverse that order. They speak first, then they regret. They react first, then they apologize. They reveal everything. Then they wonder why they feel exposed. A moment of patience can prevent years of regret. Ask yourself this question: does this person need to know what I'm about to tell them? Not, do I feel like saying it? Those are two completely different questions. Your emotions may want relief, but relief and wisdom are not always the same thing. Many people speak simply because silence feels uncomfortable. They begin filling empty spaces with personal stories. They reveal financial plans. They discuss family problems. They complain about co-workers. They confess insecurities. By the end of the conversation, they've handed someone a complete map of their private life. and they wonder why they later feel vulnerable. Privacy is not secrecy. There is a difference. Secrecy hides wrongdoing. Privacy protects peace. You are not obligated to explain every chapter of your life. You are not required to answer every personal question. You can politely decline. You can smile without elaborating. You can remain respectful without revealing everything. That is not dishonesty. It is maturity. There is another danger in speaking too freely. The more you reveal your plans, the more you expose them to unnecessary opinions. Imagine planting a small seed. Every day, before it has a chance to grow, dozens of people walk by and dig it up to inspect it. Will that seed ever become a tree? Of course not. Growth requires protection, so do your ambitions. Many dreams die, not because they were impossible, but because they were exposed too early. Someone laughed, someone doubted, someone projected their own fears onto your future. Little by little, your confidence began to disappear. Not because your dream changed, but because you allowed too many voices into a space that required silence. The Stoics believed that actions should introduce your intentions, not speeches. Build first, announce later. Let your results surprise people. Success is always more convincing than promises. There is a quiet confidence in someone who works without constant announcements. They don't need everyone watching. They don't need applause before the performance. They understand that real progress happens in private. A sculptor doesn't unveil an unfinished masterpiece. They patiently shape the stone until the work is complete. Only then do they invite the world to see it. Treat your goals the same way. Protect them while they're fragile. Share them when they're strong. Another reason your words become weapons is that people rarely remember everything you say. They remember what affects them. Imagine making one emotional statement during an argument. Years of kindness may be forgotten. That one sentence becomes the thing people remember. Words have incredible power. They can inspire, they can heal, they can unite. But they can also wound in ways that cannot easily be repaired. This is why the Stoics urged people to slow down before speaking. A sharp tongue creates deep scars. An uncontrolled mouth creates unnecessary enemies. Many conflicts begin with words that never needed to be spoken. How many friendships have ended because someone spoke in anger? How many families have been divided because pride refused to remain silent? How many opportunities have disappeared because someone revealed too much at the wrong time? More than we could ever count. Wisdom recognizes that timing matters just as much as truth. Something can be true and still be the wrong thing to say. Something can be honest and still be unnecessary. Not every truth needs immediate expression. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is wait. Wait until emotions settle. Wait until understanding becomes possible. Wait until your words can build instead of destroy. Silence often protects relationships better than impulsive honesty. There is strength in restraint. There is intelligence in patience. There is dignity in knowing when to keep certain thoughts to yourself. The world often celebrates people who always speak their mind. The Stoics admired something different. They admired people who first mastered their minds. Because if you cannot govern your own thoughts, how can you expect to govern your words? Self-mastery begins long before your lips move. It begins in the quiet conversation you have with yourself. Every day your mind offers countless thoughts. Some are wise, some are emotional, some are angry, some are fearful. You do not have to speak every one of them. You are the gatekeeper of your own mouth. Not every visitor deserves to leave through the gate. The disciplined person understands this. They allow foolish thoughts to pass without giving them a voice. They let anger cool before speaking. They let pride settle before responding. They let wisdom decide which words deserve to be heard. And because of that, their words become rare. Their words become thoughtful. Their words become trusted. Remember this. The greatest damage in life is often caused, not by what others say about you, but by what you unnecessarily reveal about yourself. Guard your words. Guard your dreams. Guard your peace. Because once your words leave your mouth, you cannot call them back. But if you learn to hold them for just a little longer, you may discover that many of them never needed to be spoken at all. Anyone can remain silent when life is easy. Anyone can stay calm when everyone agrees with them. Anyone can keep their composure when they're being praised. But what happens when you're insulted? What happens when someone disrespects you in public? What happens when you're falsely accused? What happens when someone betrays your trust? That is where true character is revealed. The Stoics believe that the greatest victories are not won over other people, they are won over yourself. It takes very little strength to shout. It takes very little discipline to react. It takes almost no wisdom to return anger with anger. But it takes extraordinary self-control to remain calm when every emotion inside you is demanding a response. This is what the Stoics practiced every single day, not because they lacked emotions, but because they refused to become slaves to them. One of the greatest misconceptions about Stoicism is that it teaches people to suppress their feelings. It doesn't. The Stoics never argued that emotions should be ignored. They taught that emotions should be understood. There is an important difference. Suppressing an emotion is like placing a lid on a boiling pot. Eventually, the pressure becomes too great, the pot explodes. Understanding an emotion is different. You acknowledge it. You observe it. You allow yourself to feel it without allowing it to take control. Imagine you're standing beside a river. Leaves float past on the surface of the water. Some are large, some are small. Some move quickly, others drift slowly. Now imagine each leaf represents an emotion: anger, fear, embarrassment, jealousy, disappointment. Do you jump into the river and chase every leaf? Of course not. You simply watch them pass. The Stoics believed your thoughts and emotions should be treated the same way. Not every feeling deserves a reaction. Just because you feel anger doesn't mean you must speak. Just because you feel offended doesn't mean you must retaliate. Just because someone provokes you doesn't mean you have to participate. Your emotions are real, but they are not your master. One of the greatest forms of freedom is realizing that there is always a space between what happens to you and how you choose to respond. Most people never notice that space. An insult enters one ear, an angry reply leaves the mouth. Everything happens within seconds. No reflection, no pause, no self-control. The Stoic trains themselves to live inside that pause, because within that brief moment lies the power to change the outcome of an entire conversation. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike the one who performed the injury." Think about how revolutionary that idea is. Someone insults you, they expect you to become angry. Someone lies about you, they expect you to defend yourself emotionally. Someone tries to humiliate you, they expect you to lose your composure. What happens when you refuse? What happens when your calmness remains untouched? Suddenly, they lose their power. Because the greatest weapon of an angry person is your reaction. Without it, they have very little. Imagine throwing a ball against a wall. The ball bounces back because the wall gives it resistance. Now imagine throwing that same ball into an open field. There is nothing to bounce against. It simply falls. Arguments work in much the same way. They require participation. When one person refuses to continue the conflict, the argument begins to lose its momentum. This doesn't mean remaining silent because you're afraid. It means remaining silent because you've chosen peace over pride. There is a profound difference. Pride says, I have to prove them wrong. Wisdom asks, will proving them wrong improve my life? Most of the time, the answer is no. Not every misunderstanding deserves correction. Not every insult deserves revenge. Not every criticism deserves your attention. Sometimes the greatest response is simply continuing to live well. Your peace is too expensive to be purchased by someone else's opinion. Don't sell it so cheaply. Seneca once observed that anger is temporary madness. Think about the decisions people make while they're angry. They end friendships, they destroy marriages, they quit jobs, they send messages they later regret. They say words they wish they could take back. Then, when the emotion finally fades, the consequences remain. A few minutes of uncontrolled emotion can create years of unnecessary pain. This is why emotional discipline is one of the greatest investments you can ever make. Every time you choose patience over impulse, you become stronger. Every time you remain calm during chaos, you become wiser. Every time you refuse to let another person's behavior dictate your own, you reclaim your freedom. Consider the ocean during a violent storm. The surface is chaotic. Waves crash in every direction. The wind roars. Everything appears unstable. But deep beneath the surface, the water remains remarkably calm. The Stoics believed your mind should resemble those depths. The world around you may become loud, people may criticize you, life may become unpredictable. But deep within, you remain steady, you remain anchored, you remain at peace. That kind of calm cannot be purchased, it cannot be borrowed, it must be built, day after day, choice after choice, moment after moment. Many people believe strength means overpowering others. The Stoics believed strength meant overpowering your own impulses. Anyone can conquer a city, few can conquer their temper. Anyone can silence another person, few can silence the voice of anger within themselves. That is the harder battle, and it is the battle that truly matters. Remember this, every insult is a test. Every criticism is a lesson. Every moment of disrespect is an opportunity to practice self-mastery. Life is constantly asking you one question: who is in control, your emotions or your principle? The answer is revealed, not by what you feel, but by what you choose to do, because emotions are temporary. Character is permanent. The Stoics never sought to eliminate emotion. They sought to ensure that wisdom always had the final word. The next time someone provokes you, pause, breathe, remain silent for just a moment longer than your emotions want you to. That single moment may save you from saying something you'll regret for years. And remember this truth: the person who angers you controls you, but the person who masters their own anger cannot be controlled by anyone. That is the power of emotional silence, and it is one of the greatest forms of freedom a human being can ever achieve. One of the greatest fears people carry is not the fear of failure, it is not the fear of rejection, it is not even the fear of being alone. It is the fear of silence. The moment a conversation becomes quiet, people rush to fill the empty space. A few seconds pass, someone clears their throat. Someone tells a joke, someone changes the subject. Someone begins talking simply because they cannot bear the silence. But why? Why are we so uncomfortable with being quiet? The answer is simple, because silence forces us to meet ourselves. When the noise disappears, when the conversations end, when the notifications stop, there is nothing left to distract us from our own thoughts. For many people, that is terrifying. It is much easier to stay busy than it is to sit alone with your mind. It is easier to keep talking than to ask yourself the difficult questions. Am I living according to my values? Am I becoming the person I want to be? What am I running from? What am I afraid to face? These are the questions that silence brings to the surface. This is why so many people avoid it. The Stoics, however, welcomed it. To them, silence was not something to escape. It was something to cultivate, because they understood that a noisy mind rarely discovers wisdom. Imagine a lake on a windy day. The surface is constantly moving. The water is disturbed. You cannot see beneath it. Now imagine that same lake at sunrise. The wind is gone. The water becomes perfectly still. Suddenly you can see all the way to the bottom. The human mind works in much the same way. When your thoughts are constantly stirred by noise, you lose clarity. When your life is filled with endless conversations, constant entertainment, endless scrolling, and endless opinions, your mind becomes like that restless lake. You react instead of reflect. You consume instead of contemplate. You move through life without ever truly seeing it. Silence allows the mind to settle. And when the mind settles, wisdom begins to emerge. Marcus Aurelius spent time each day writing in solitude. He wasn't writing to impress anyone. In fact, his personal journal was never intended for public eyes. He wrote because silence helped him examine his own mind. It allowed him to question his impulses, to challenge his ego, to strengthen his character. He understood something that many people overlook. If you don't spend time listening to yourself, you'll spend your life being influenced by everyone else. Today's world profits from your distraction. Every notification competes for your attention. Every headline demands your reaction. Every opinion invites your participation. There is always another debate, another controversy, another reason to speak. But wisdom often grows in the opposite direction. It grows in stillness. The quiet person is not necessarily silent because they have nothing to say. Sometimes they are silent because they are protecting something far more valuable than conversation. Their focus, their peace, their attention. These are treasure. And every unnecessary conversation spends a little of each. Imagine carrying a bucket of clean water across a desert. If there are small holes in the bucket, you may not notice them at first. A few drops escape here, a few drops there, but by the time you reach your destination, the bucket is nearly empty. Attention works the same way. Every pointless argument, every meaningless conversation, every unnecessary explanation, every emotional reaction creates another small leak. Eventually you wonder why you feel mentally exhausted. It isn't because life is too difficult. It's because your attention has been leaking into places that never deserved it. The Stoics guarded their attention carefully. They knew that wherever attention goes, life follows. If your attention is constantly captured by drama, your life becomes dramatic. If your attention is consumed by gossip, your thinking becomes shallow. If your attention is scattered everywhere, your potential is scattered as well. Silence gathers your attention back together. It brings your energy home. Another remarkable benefit of silence is that it teaches patience. Modern life rewards speed, instant messages, instant opinions, instant reactions, instant gratification. Everything feels urgent. Everything feels like it requires an immediate response. But does it? How many messages truly need to be answered the second they arrive? How many arguments deserve an immediate reply? How many decisions improve simply because they were made quickly? Very few. The Stoics understood that time has a way of revealing what emotion tries to hide. A decision made in anger often appears foolish the next morning. A message you almost sent late at night suddenly seems unnecessary after a good night's sleep. A conflict that felt enormous today may seem insignificant a week from now. Time creates perspective. Silence gives time the opportunity to do its work. There is tremendous wisdom in delaying your response, not because you're avoiding the issue, but because you're allowing your judgment to become clearer. Patience is not weakness. It is disciplined strength. Many people believe confidence comes from speaking boldly. The Stoics believed confidence comes from needing to speak less. Think about the people who constantly seek validation. They announce every success. They defend every criticism. They chase every compliment. They fear every moment of silence. Now think about someone who is deeply secure. They don't rush to prove themselves. They don't need to dominate conversations. They don't feel threatened by quiet moments. Their confidence is internal, not dependent on applause. That is the confidence silence builds. The more comfortable you become with silence, the less dependent you become on approval. The less dependent you become on approval, the freer you become. Eventually, something remarkable begins to happen. You stop feeling the need to win every argument. You stop explaining every decision. You stop correcting every misunderstanding. You stop seeking permission to be yourself, not because you've become indifferent, but because you've become grounded. Your identity no longer depends on other people's opinions. It rests upon your own principles, and principles do not need constant defense. Remember this: silence is not empty. Silence is where discipline grows. Silence is where clarity is found. Silence is where wisdom is refined. Every minute you spend becoming comfortable with your own company strengthens something within you that the outside world cannot easily shake. Because the person who enjoys their own silence is never lonely, they are simply at peace. And peace is one of the rarest forms of wealth a human being can possess. The next time you find yourself reaching for your phone simply to escape a quiet moment, pause, resist the impulse. Sit with the silence instead. Listen to your breathing, observe your thoughts, allow your mind to settle. You may discover that the answers you've been searching for have been waiting beneath the noise all along. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately noticed someone who wasn't trying to be noticed? They weren't the loudest, they weren't telling the funniest stories, they weren't interrupting every conversation, they weren't trying to prove how intelligent they were, and yet, their presence carried weight. People naturally listened when they spoke. Their words seemed to matter. Their calmness commanded attention without demanding it. What makes a person like that so powerful? It isn't their voice, it's their character. Most people spend their lives chasing attention. They believe that if more people notice them, they'll become more important. So, they speak louder, they share more, they exaggerate. They constantly seek opportunities to place themselves at the center of every conversation. But attention and respect are not the same thing. Attention can be gained in seconds. Respect must be earned over time. A person can attract attention by creating controversy, by shouting, by showing off, by constantly talking, but respect comes from something much deeper. It comes from consistency. It comes from integrity. It comes from self-control. The Stoics understood that your reputation is built not by the number of words you speak, but by the quality of the life you live. Think about the strongest tree in a forest. It doesn't compete with the others. It doesn't try to prove its strength. It simply stands firm through every season, storm after storm, year after year. Its strength becomes obvious without a single word. People are no different. When your character remains steady during difficult times, people notice. When you remain calm while everyone else is losing control, people notice. When you refuse to gossip, when you refuse to insult others, when you refuse to be drawn into unnecessary conflict, people notice. You don't need to announce your values, you live them, and that quiet consistency becomes impossible to ignore. One of the greatest misconceptions in modern society is that influence belongs to the loudest voice. History tells a different story. The people who have changed the world were not always those who spoke the most. They were often those whose actions carried more weight than their words. The Stoics believed that your life should become your argument, not your speeches, not your social media posts, not your promises, your life. Anyone can talk about discipline, but waking up every day and practicing it, that commands respect. Anyone can speak about honesty, but remaining honest when dishonesty would benefit you, that commands respect. Anyone can claim to value peace, but remaining peaceful in the middle of chaos, that commands respect. Your actions are always speaking, even when your mouth is closed. In fact, they often speak more loudly than your words ever could. Imagine meeting two people. The first constantly tells you how trustworthy they are. The second never mentions trust at all. Instead, they consistently keep their promises. They arrive when they say they will. They honor their commitments. They speak truthfully. After a few months, which person would you trust more? The answer is obvious. Character doesn't need advertising. It reveals itself naturally. This is why wise people spend less time managing their image and more time building their character. An image can be created overnight. Character is built one decision at a time. One quiet act of integrity, one moment of self-control, one choice to remain silent when anger demanded a response. These small moments seem insignificant, but over time they become the foundation of an extraordinary life. There is another reason quiet people often earn respect. They make others feel safe. Think about the person who gossips constantly. If they speak that way about other people, what do you think they'll say about you when you leave the room? Now think about someone who never spreads rumors, who never shares private conversations, who guards the trust people place in them. Whom would you feel more comfortable confiding in? Trust grows wherever discretion exists. People naturally respect those who know how to keep confidence. The Stoics believed that loyalty is measured not by grand declarations, but by quiet consistency. A trustworthy person doesn't need to announce that they're trustworthy. Their behavior makes the announcement for them. There is a saying that still holds true today: empty vessels make the most noise. Whether or not you've heard that saying before, its meaning is clear. Those with the least substance often feel the greatest need to prove themselves. Meanwhile, those with genuine confidence rarely feel compelled to announce it. Why? Because confidence is not built on other people's opinions. It is built on self-respect. The person who respects themselves has very little to prove. They don't need to win every debate. They don't need the final word. They don't need constant recognition. Their peace is enough. Their principles are enough. Their character is enough. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself to concern his mind with becoming a good person, rather than arguing about what a good person should be. That lesson is timeless. The world doesn't need more people talking about virtue. It needs more people living it. Imagine how different your life would become if every promise you made was fulfilled, if every word you spoke was honest, if every action reflected your values. You wouldn't need to convince anyone of who you are. Your life would speak on your behalf. And that is the highest form of credibility. Many people exhaust themselves trying to build the perfect reputation. The Stoics focused on building the right character, because reputation depends on what others think. Character depends on what you choose. One is beyond your control, the other belongs entirely to you. Always choose the one you can control. As your character grows, something remarkable begins to happen. You become slower to judge, quicker to forgive, more patient, more thoughtful, more disciplined. You stop chasing temporary victories. You begin pursuing lasting wisdom. People sense this change. They may not always be able to explain it, but they feel it. Your presence becomes calmer. Your words become more deliberate. Your confidence becomes quieter, and your influence becomes stronger, not because you demanded respect, but because you earned it. Remember this: respect cannot be forced, trust cannot be demanded, influence cannot be faked. These things grow naturally in the life of a person who has mastered themselves. The quiet person isn't respected because they speak less. They're respected because, when they do speak, their words are supported by the weight of their character, and there is no greater authority than a life lived with integrity. By now, you've probably realized that this journey was never really about keeping your mouth shut. It was about something much deeper. It was about mastering yourself. Silence, in the Stoic tradition, was never an escape from the world. It was a way of engaging with the world more wisely. The person who speaks less doesn't necessarily think less. In fact, they often think more, they observe more, they understand more, they react less. And because they react less, they suffer less. That is the quiet power the Stoics spent their lives cultivating. Throughout this journey, we've explored many lessons. We've learned that talking too much often weakens our position. We've seen how the ego constantly demands to be heard. We've discovered that saying less allows us to observe more. We've learned to stop explaining ourselves to people who have already chosen not to understand us. We've seen that listening is one of the greatest forms of wisdom. We've learned that careless words can become weapons in the hands of others. We've discovered the strength of emotional silence. We've embraced the peace that comes from becoming comfortable with quiet moments. And finally, we've seen that true respect is earned through character, not conversation. Each of these lessons points toward one truth. The greatest battle you will ever fight is not against other people. It is against yourself, against your impulses, against your pride, against your anger, against your endless desire for validation. Because the moment you stop needing everyone to understand you, you begin understanding yourself. The moment you stop trying to prove your worth, you begin living with genuine confidence. The moment you stop reacting to every insult, you discover that your peace was never in someone else's hands. It was always in yours. Think about how much of your life has been shaped by words. Words you've spoken, words you've heard, words you wish you could take back, words you replay in your mind years after they were spoken. Words have incredible power. They can build, they can destroy, they can heal, they can divide. But perhaps the greatest power of all lies in knowing when not to use them. There is a beautiful paradox in life. The less you feel the need to prove yourself, the more convincing you become. The less you chase attention, the more your presence is noticed. The less you argue, the stronger your convictions appear. The less you seek approval, the freer you become. That is the paradox of quiet strength. Imagine two mountains. One constantly shakes, creating noise and drawing attention to itself. The other stands silently, unmoved by the storms around it. Which one appears stronger? Strength has never depended on volume. It has always depended on stability. Become like that mountain. Let criticism come. Remain steady. Let praise come. Remain humble. Let success come. Remain disciplined. Let failure come. Remain hopeful. Do not allow external circumstances to dictate your state. That is the heart of Stoicism. The world will continue to test you. Someone will misunderstand you. Someone will insult you. Someone will doubt you. Someone will betray your trust. Someone will underestimate your potential. You cannot stop these things from happening, but you can decide who you become because of them. Will you become bitter or wiser? Will you become louder or calmer? Will you become reactive or disciplined? Every challenge places those questions before you, and every response shapes the person you are becoming. Remember that silence is not the absence of courage. Sometimes, silence requires far more courage than speaking. It takes courage to walk away from an argument you know you could win. It takes courage to let someone misunderstand you without desperately defending yourself. It takes courage to keep working quietly while others seek recognition. It takes courage to protect your peace in a world that constantly invites conflict. That courage is not weakness, it is mastery. The Stoics believed that no one is free unless they first become master of themselves. Read those words carefully. No one is free unless they first become master of themselves. If your emotions control your speech, you are not free. If every insult controls your mood, you are not free. If every opinion changes your direction, you are not free. If your happiness depends on applause, you are not free. Freedom begins the moment your inner world becomes stronger than the noise around you. That is why silence matters. Not because silence is magical, but because silence creates space to think, space to observe, space to choose wisdom over impulse, space to hear your conscience more clearly than the opinions of strangers. And in that space, character is formed. There is one final lesson the Stoics would want you to remember. Life is short, far shorter than we imagine. Do not waste it trying to win arguments that don't matter. Do not spend your days explaining yourself to people who have already closed their minds. Do not surrender your peace for the sake of having the last word. Your time is too precious. Your attention is too valuable. Your mind is too important. Protect them. Use your words carefully. Let them encourage. Let them heal. Let them inspire. But never allow them to become servants of your ego. Speak because your words bring value. Remain silent when silence brings greater wisdom. And above all, live in such a way that your character speaks long before your mouth ever does. Because, at the end of your life, people will not remember how many arguments you won. They will not remember how many conversations you dominated. They will not remember how often you defended yourself. They will remember how you made them feel. They will remember your integrity, your kindness, your discipline, your courage, your example. Those are the things that outlive words. So, from this day forward, make a quiet promise to yourself. Pause before you speak. Listen before you judge. Observe before you react. Think before you answer. And whenever you're uncertain, ask yourself one simple question. Will these words make this moment better? If the answer is yes, speak with honesty. Speak with kindness. Speak with courage. But if the answer is no, smile. Remain silent, and let your character do the talking. Because the strongest person in the room is rarely the loudest. The wisest person is rarely the one who speaks the most. And the greatest victories in life are often won by those who first learn to master a single thing, their own tongue. If this message resonated with you, carry it into your daily life. The next time you're tempted to argue, pause. The next time you're eager to explain yourself, reflect. The next time anger rises within you, breathe. Choose wisdom over impulse. Choose discipline over ego. Choose peace over pride, not because it's easy, but because it is the path that leads to freedom. Remember, the mouth speaks what the mind contains, but silence reveals what the soul has mastered. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, guard your peace, strengthen your character, and remember, sometimes the most powerful words you'll ever speak are the ones you choose to leave unsaid.